Hey everyone, welcome to Barry McGuire's Creative Education Group Monday main event. I think that's what we call it, Wayne, isn't it? Monday main event.
Barry's calling it the main event, then it's the main event.
We know it's Monday. Let's just go. Welcome to Monday. Here we go. We're doing a creative financing free-for-all. This one's been in the works for a while. At least a couple of days, right, guys? You guys are you're so spoiled. You've got. Do they see the same thing I do? Neil is right beside me. Neil Oliver, RTO specialist. Shaune Impey, you know him. He is all-around mortgage broker specialist, Smith Maneuver. And we have Dan Heon. I don't think you guys have met Dan yet. He is also well-rounded and part of our focus team mortgage broker across the country, I believe.
Yeah, all the way clients buying in New Brunswick. Crazy.
Oh yeah? Good. We'll be taking advantage of that knowledge later on because we've got a lot of people in Halifax.
Oh yeah, booming town in Nova Scotia, and all of the Maritimes are on fire right now.
But not tonight. Well, unless there's questions, it is a free-for-all. If you have questions, please put them in the comments, and we'll be sure to get to them. And just say hi. We love to hear from you guys too. Okay. Hey, Wayne. Wayne's here too.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm okay.
What kind of questions should people ask today? What kind of questions should they, start thinking about? What is creative financing?
I always like to ask people, tell me a deal that you're working on, and with all the minds at this table, I'm sure we can find 5 different ways to put that deal together and choose the right one that's best for you. That's I always like to put it out there. But yeah, if you just have a motivated seller, I'm sure there's a way to finance it about 3 or 4 different ways.
Good point.
I suppose this creative financing can kind of cover everything, right? We can talking about creative ways to finance. We can talk about private lending. We can talk about RSP lending, and we can talk about financing art. No, okay, forget that last one. Okay, let's cut that out.
Private lending is going to be a session all by itself later in the month.
That's good to know. Financing
there's
RTO.
So many. RTO is in here. Let's talk about this financing as it pertains to our main creative strategies tonight.
Yeah.
So AFS, RTO, fix and flip, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
So financing AFS deals when they complete?
Or where does the mortgage broker fit in this? Because we've talked many times that when it comes to creative strategies, mortgage brokers are a great source of referrals.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, crap. Where do we start?
We just did.
Okay, sorry.
I think all mortgage brokers are going to have those turn down leads, right? So if you're an investor, you want to, talk to all the mortgage brokers that are working in your general field. I get asked that so many times. The investors call me up and said, hey, have you got anybody that didn't qualify for 5% down? And I go, no, because all my clients are you, and you're buying 20% down, or you're doing creative deals. I'm like, I don't deal with 5% down little Billy who's buying his first home. So, you got to connect with the regular mortgage brokers who deal with that kind of thing. And, get the leads from there, from the referrals. But, for the investor mortgage broker ones, it's tough to get referrals for, people that just don't quite qualify, and have their 5% deposit to do an RTO or something along those lines, right? So it's important, to make the connections with all your mortgage brokers and just know the ones that are going to help you at the investor level and ones that are going to send you tenant buyers.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. It's so imperative, especially on the RTO side, to know or to have a great network of mortgage people, whether it's agents or brokers who are going to be dealing with people outside of investors who are going to find those gems that can't qualify today. Right. And there's lots of reasons why they don't qualify. It's not always just about the down payment. It could be their credit just isn't perfect. Could be that they have too much debt. But definitely, you know, having those relationships is key. And I think a lot of people undervalue those relationships, and it's so important.
Yeah, last weekend I was talking to an investor at a conference, and she's explaining her situation to me, and had no idea. You know, she was going to buy a property from her family, but because she got transferred, she hadn't really established herself yet and didn't have the tax returns. And so I threw out the idea rent to own, and I said, okay. She had no idea what, you know, until I kind of painted the picture for her. I said, okay, you're buying the house for, I think it was $100,000. It was a small property. And I said, if you put out the opportunity to your network, and I said, you know what, I think the down payment would be 20%, $20,000. And I said, you have to come to the table with some kind of a good deposit, you know, call it 5% typically. I know, Neil, that's what I recommend if you're bringing on a tenant buyer, somewhere in around that 5% at least, to show they're serious. And I said, okay, so if you put down, so I was actually talking to the tenant buyer, and I said, go put this out to your investor world. And she texted me back later that day, and she said, oh my God, I have 30 different, leads on people that want to help me buy this house from her. So, you know, that was so important that people don't even really know some of these creative strategies. And when they get presented to them, or a different way of looking at it, you know, it's interesting. Just painting that picture and telling people different ways how they can put their deals together.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem, is that there's a lot of mortgage people who understand only a certain percentage of these creative strategies, right? So we get a lot of people who call us up, they've bought a home, they've waived their financing, and something has stopped them from qualifying. They don't have the down payment that now the bank wants, or they found something on their credit, and immediately they're being positioned for a private mortgage. And I understand that there's maybe some fees in there that mortgage professionals will make for positioning a private in place of some other form, but it is amazing to me how many people have no clue that rent to own exists, for example, and even AFS. I mean, here in Ontario, AFS is not really a thing, but it is remarkable when you start chatting with people about how to do an AFS, and they look dumbfounded, but they look extremely excited by the concept of not having to qualify for financing at this particular time. So yeah, it's amazing who knows what. And, you know, a lot of education is always, well, education in general is a good thing. And the more you educate people on their options, they can then choose and select the one that's going to fit their situation the best.
I always think the best creative strategy investor would make the best real estate agent. Wise, because they can put together pretty much any deal. Tell me, the seller, what do you want? Buyer, what do you want? Okay, this is how to do it. And you have yourself a deal, right? So, you know, I would think that, well, actually, maybe we should give all realtors training on how to do creative strategies, but then the competition would just go crazy.
Yeah,
we were talking in our group that it's not competition, it's a rivalry. It's a different approach.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. You know, a lot of realtors don't understand they can make money by putting together some creative strategies, and they just, they're like half the doctors graduate in the bottom of their class. You don't want them. Half the realtors barely passed their exam, probably. So,
you know, I think we're touching on a really good point here, because if you can train your realtor about how they will still earn a commission, they'll be more open to it. Because I've actually had selling realtors, you know, our buying realtor, knew how to do it, but the selling realtor just killed it, because he thought, okay, if we're going to hold financing or hold title, then we won't get a realtor commission, and they just killed it. And so the buying realtor actually went back and said, no, you know, that deposit, that's what's going to pay you and me. And funny enough, the deal got accepted the next day. So, you know, it's very interesting how, you know, you, like Neil was saying, educate them how they will get paid, even though doing a creative deal, and you'll watch the resistance kind of just slide away.
Well, I can't even tell you how many deals in the last 3 weeks, or how many properties here that we have swept in and purchased when the deal before us fell apart. And it fell apart on financing. And rather than looking for a creative strategy to finance the deal, they just let it die. And it benefited us because we had tenant buyers looking in those areas. We were able to sweep in, buy the house, no other competition. It was amazing. But had the realtors known that they could look at a different option, they would be able to salvage those deals for their clients. And like you mentioned, make a commission themselves.
Now, to be fair, we are teaching some realtors creative strategies, and they're making great use of them. So not all realtors don't understand them. We're working on it.
There's some good ones in the group for sure. But I'm saying, as a rule, if you took 100 of them, maybe 1 or 2 might have a little bit of training, right? So it's all good.
Okay.
Mortgage brokers are no different. They need to be trained up, and I got brokers in my brokerage that say, I don't like to do rentals, and I just want mom and dad buying the family home. That's the deals they can put together. Pretty simple. So sure restricts their business.
Facebook user says,
go ahead.
Rent to own is not something that is taught in the Alberta real estate course. Luckily, we'll help you with that. We'll teach you.
I just wanted to remind everyone who maybe just stepped in, and didn't see the beginning, that today we're covering creative financing. And if you have any questions related to creative financing at all, post them in the comments. We do have 1, possibly 2 right now, actually. Do you want me to read it?
Sure.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Okay, sure. Okay, who wants to tackle this one? Clear title seller, building is condo tied up by lawsuit, 7 years in running. No institutional lender will touch it until lawsuit clears up in 3 to 5 years. 150 plus unit building, and not a single unit has sold. Go.
Nice.
All right, let's go.
Out.
I saw a realtor I know tackle this. I think it was Chris Davies, and he just put together a group, and he just said, okay, what does this building, 150 unit building, look like as a multi-unit residential apartment building, and figured out what a person could afford to pay on a commercial level, and this went in and figured out what it would take, how much money it would take to get rid of the lawsuit. And the investor group just bought the whole 150 units at whatever price. And I'm sure it made financial sense for the buyers and the sellers, because the sellers wanted to get out from under that big lawsuit and just move forward or move on, most likely. But that was a brilliant idea, where instead of picking off individual ones and maybe doing some creative seller financing on individual units until the problem went away, this was a group that tackled the whole project and was very successful at actually making good money for the investor group buying the whole apartment building, but then at the same time, a win-win for the people who are just trapped, because there's no way, if you're an individual owner, there's no way you're going to sell 1-2 units unless someone's willing to take on the problem there. So creative strategy, I think you can do some really good things in terms of looking at the whole building. But creatively, other than that, if you didn't have your investor group to buy the whole building, I'd probably be negotiating on onesie twosies with a lot of seller financing and private financing, maybe throwing in, I know you're going to cover that later, Donna, but the RSP side of things as well. But you're right. No bank is going to touch that either. They'll look at the AGMs and turn it down right away.
The only one making money are the lawyers.
Yeah. So what about you guys? Any ideas on a nasty legal battle?
I don't even know where to start on that one. Need a lot more information.
Need to know what the lawsuit is all about. So who's suing who?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is one I could rent to own. So I'm
you could do 150 of them right there.
I could do 150 rent to owns, but the building itself, I don't think I could help with.
Yeah, so it's not surprising that not one of those units has sold because of that challenge. So you either got to get rid of that challenge and fix the problem, or do some creative financing with each seller until the problem does go away. But yeah, that's a long road if it's 7 years and no end in sight. I think that would be my question too.
There was a question just recently, and I think it was in a separate group. Someone was asking about how the financing works after an agreement for sale is completed. And I recommended that they actually, check this out. Donna, you know what I'm talking about. So I think the question that was asked, sorry.
Yeah, I believe he was asking about financing after value has gone up, property value has gone up, but the AFS hasn't matured yet. Is that right?
He wanted to know if you could refinance it if you're not on title to grab the value of the increase of value and to pull that out. Did one of you guys want to kind of tackle that one and kind of explain how that works?
I think that would be a tricky one because no bank is going to give you a mortgage unless your name's on the title, right? If your mortgage, the banks always instruct their lawyers to say, if this person's not on title, don't give them the mortgage. So, the only way to do what you're talking about is have the seller on your side and saying, hey, I owe you that 80 grand at the end of the AFS. Why don't we bump the mortgage up and I'll give you 40 of that now. And then, the other, so you have to make it a win-win, but yeah, the bank's only going to give the current seller that bump in mortgage, even though your AFS, hasn't matured yet. So you'd have to strike a deal with the seller and, share in that uptick.
And I think that the second part of that person's question was, upon completion, upon maturity of the agreement for sale, what are you qualifying for? Are you qualifying for the purchase price that you agreed with the seller? Are you qualifying for today's value? Or are you qualifying for the balance that is left remaining? And how does that work? How much do you have to, like, you go to the mortgage company and say, hey, Mr. Lender or Mr. Broker, what do I got to do in order to get this into my name?
So I think the AFS is just a standard agreement for buy and sell, and the bank is going to want to see a copy of that. It just has a really long closing on it, right? And so the banks have the rule where they're going to finance 80% of, the lower of two. And the lower of two is basically, what did you pay for this place? And what's today's appraisal value? So if you paid 800 and it's worth $1 million, the bank doesn't care. They're giving you 80% of 800. So, my way around that is to go in and spend a few bucks with some creative financing. That's where your brokers are going to help out here, is come in, get possession, get title to the property, and then do a refinance where there's only one rule, which is what is the market value? Now we can get the mortgage based on that because there is no purchase and sale agreement anymore. You are the registered owner. Mm-hmm. So you have to do it in 2 steps. But therefore, you can tackle a lot of your trapped equity that you negotiated, maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
There was an investor throwing out some stuff that he was able to get basically 80%, even if what he ended up paying after all his mortgage pay down and deposits and everything was less than 80. He was able to get 80% at least of the purchase price. So he was getting more money than what was owed, I guess, so pay out the mortgage.
So how does it work in a scenario, say, for example, on a zero money down deal? Over a period of time, maybe, you make your payments, you paid down the principal, and now you have 20% equity, in relation to what the purchase price was and what's left on you owing. Does the bank take that into account, that you've essentially paid the seller, or you paid that down, that 20%, or does the bank still want to see you put some more money into it in order to close?
I think most banks are going to do what we talked about, is take a look at your contract and see what that number was originally and, look at that. But, I think that's a case-by-case lender scenario, because I've talked to Andrea and a few other people that, have connections to small, we'll call them just smaller banks that maybe don't have to, abide by federal, guidelines and so on and so forth. I'm talking about credit unions and that sort of thing. And they can say, hey, the equity's there. Okay, we're going to do it for you. But for the most part, you know, the banks that us as mortgage brokers have to deal with, and the branches, so to speak, you know, their head office adjudication departments, they really are, you know, black and white. It's, you know, what did you pay or what's the appraisal value? So even though, like you said, there might be 20% equity there, Wayne, you know, you could have a challenge when you go to finance that out. But, you know, a way around that again is just, you know, get some private financing based on the true value of the property, and you'll have enough money to get rid of, you know, any kind of seller financing that's on there. But yeah, definitely a tricky part, because you have to know what the bank's rules are and, you know, play within them.
So that obviously answers mystery Facebook user's question as well, just to clarify that, yeah, it's a lot easier to use private money, like you said, and then do a refinance afterwards. That way you get the full value.
Yeah, yeah. So having good private lender contacts for short-term money is definitely key.
Even if you could go to a lender that doesn't mind refinancing after a shorter period of time too. So
yeah,
you may buy it at a lower number and then refi. So some have a 1-year rule of ownership, right? But some will do less if you refi with them.
Yeah, so if you are working with a mortgage broker that doesn't know who those banks are, you might catch yourself in a bind. So definitely some banks are tighter than others when it comes to refinance. They'll pull the title and see what you bid and how long ago you bought it. And if there's a significant increase there, you know, even though I've had fights with them saying that, you know, my client did buy, but they bought it for a good deal. And, you know, there's a third party independent appraisal showing what the true value is. And they always come back and argue they just don't want to finance the guy's profit. So that's the bank's response to that one. I've said, nobody's trying to cheat the bank here. It's all about, you know, this is the true value, but they see the short window and they freak out. They can't explain in their banker's mind that, you know, quick turn creative deals are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You guys basically took the words out of my mouth, and you have to have good mortgage brokers who understand this kind of stuff. This isn't something you can just go walk up to TD or RBC and try and explain it to them. I mean, you might be able to, but it might be a little more difficult. And then
they might tell you don't buy investment real estate. I had one client tell me, "Oh, I went into my RBC broker and he told me, oh, you better not. The market's crashing. Get out of real estate." Oh, I had to laugh.
And as well, these are very advanced strategies. Agreement for sale and all these things are advanced strategies. So definitely get the education. This isn't something just, you know, you watch a free Facebook Live and think that you can just go jump in and do it. If you have taken education or courses, and maybe you've taken Barry and Donna's courses, just hop into the student success group and just ask your questions there, and make sure you're getting them from experienced investors. You know, definitely bug Andrea Workington. Just send everything to Andrea.
Sorry, Andrea. Yeah.
Creative financing is so powerful. I have a deal, actually 2 deals. One really comes to mind where a client bought a $1.3 million campground with zero of her own money, and is going to piece off the little stalls in there. And by the time the individual lots are all sold, she'll own like a $1.8 million campsite debt free. And she did it all zero down and creative financing. So using these strategies is so powerful, you know. That one deal alone, just by using the power of knowledge of how to put that deal together, is going to make her a multi-millionaire over the next year and a half while all those sites. And, you know, with COVID, take a guess at how fast those lots are going off the shelf, because everybody wants out of the big city and a beautiful lot in the forest. And just brilliant. And I'm so lucky I got to be a part of that creative strategy. So it was awesome.
I'm pretty sure we all know somebody or multiple somebodies who have gone ahead and bought a lot of real estate, and you kind of wonder how they did it. You know, they don't always tell their secrets, of course, but it's not because they went to the bank and they qualified for 15 mortgages. You know, not everyone can do that, but there are people out there that have been able to use different creative financing strategies, and they bought multiple properties that you wouldn't even think that people would buy. Right, like I've seen people in other countries buying hotels hotels, and the countries that they're in, the hotels they can't get financing. But yet somehow they come up with $1.5 million in order to buy this hotel in cash. Creative financing. It's so powerful, but it's pretty unknown. I mean, it's known in this group, but I mean, when you walk away from this group and you're not on Facebook anymore, there are a lot of people shake their head because they have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that RSP and creative financing story, or that course you're teaching, is going to be so powerful. Another deal comes to mind on Vancouver Island, where one of my clients is putting together like a $20 million land development construction deal. And if you walk in the front door of a bank and you haven't been a land developer for 6-7 years and have 4 or 5 projects on your resume list, the bank sends you walking. And so how does someone kind of start into that business and go? Well, you do creative strategies, vendor takebacks, and investor mortgages, and private draw construction mortgages, and phasing it out. And you'd be surprised what a little bit of creativity can go. And that project's going to change many lives just by being able to think outside of the box and not having to rely on the bank to get that project done. That's it's so important when you can do deals and not have to rely on the bank. I tell my flippers, I said, you know what, I've got private money for you to flip that house. It's probably going to cost you 10% money to flip that house, but you know what? The ease of getting the deal done, you can do multiples at a time. You're not going to have any payout penalties, and over the long run, just having access to that money and being able to do deals where the regular banks would say no. Well, a regular bank will shut you down anyways if there's no kitchen or flooring in the property, right? So the appraiser goes in, the house is tore apart, and all of a sudden your deal's dead. There's no money for you. So there went your $100,000 profit, unless you have a different way to finance that deal.
You've probably heard the argument from people that I'm not paying 10% money, I'm going to get a partner instead. And then when you run the numbers and find out they'd make $50,000 using private money and only $35,000 because they had to give half their profit away to a joint venture partner, they often don't see that side of the picture. So
I make a joke about that. I say that's people stepping over the loonies to go pick up the dime they just saved.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I can't even say how many investors will tell you that they can't do another deal. I have to do either B financing or some sort of private financing. And when you work out the numbers, they're still netting 17, 18%, even with the penalties and the interest rate. I don't know. For me, I would take a property that's going to net me 17, 18% in a year, because I'm not really sure where I'm going to get that if I'm not getting properties, right? Like, people just don't understand. I have a lot of people always tell me, oh, RSPs, mutual funds, the way to go. Yeah, I don't know about that, but B mortgage, where I'm still going to make 15, 16, 70% and $400 or $500 in cash flow, it sounds a lot sweeter to me than any kind of mutual fund or RSP could ever possibly net me.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a number block, or is it that they just don't know the right questions to ask? I think it's a little bit intimidating for new investors to think about the level of financing and where do you start. So what would you tell new investors in the creative realm they would do to get started? Would they reach out to you guys, or where do you fit in?
Andrea. Just talk to Andrea. That's weird stuff.
I think talk to Andrea. I think the biggest thing is you need to know what your options are. If I'm a creative investor, I want to know, what are my options? What are my choices? How can I, where can I get the money? And I've actually created a whole template, and I show people, I said, if you go to the bank and the place isn't too badly beat up, you might squeeze in one of these deals for financing a project. But, if the house is a bit, in rough shape, you better know what other options you have available. And then, a spreadsheet. Don't make your decisions based on emotions. Do the math. By the time you pay out a regular bank's payout penalty, let's say $3-4 if you're lucky, and you choose a variable rate mortgage, that's going to cover a lot of upfront interest or setup fees on a private mortgage, with zero payout penalty, right? So I would say look at your options and run the math and do the numbers and make a factual decision. Don't get, like you said, Donna, don't get sticker shock because the mortgage broker quoted you 9.5% and your jaw drops. Do the math and look at it, because if, what's the difference if you pay 2 and 3%, but you get hit with a great big 4 or 5% payout penalty by RBC or wherever, right? So do the math, and in most cases, the answers will show itself right there. But there's so many other factors. So, talk to Neil, talk to Shaune, talk to myself, and we'll say, hey, this place is too badly beat up. That option's right off the table. Or, you know what, we can probably squeeze this one in, but, we won't be able to do, 2 or 3 or 4 of these a year kind of thing.
I think this is where our
banks don't like you paying out your mortgages after 4 or 5 months every time when you do a flip. So
yeah,
the mortgage broker will get his fingers slapped if you bring too many of those to him. So, and the nice thing about private is, I've sent in deals at 9 a.m. and I've got commitment at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So yeah, we like the deal. We're going to fund it. Away you go. So
yeah, I think the powerful thing, Dan, that you brought up was doing the math. Right, 9% sounds like a high percentage when you look at what the banks are giving, but 9% is still a better interest rate to pay than no interest rate on no property. And I think when you start to run the math, you'll see that it actually does make sense. And I think that's where a lot of people get the sticker shock. Is they hear 9-10% and they go, whoa, I'm not going to make any money at all. Yeah. And when you run the numbers, you find out that you're still making a lot better profit than you would if you invested in your RSPs and mutual funds.
Yeah, especially if you're in Ontario right now, things are going up $10,000 a month.
Yeah, it is pretty ridiculous. There's no doubt.
It is.
Okay, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to my original point. There is in our focus workshops, our mortgage brokers are a big part of our focus team, and we spend a lot of time. We're very familiar with your thoughts and ideas, but I don't know that the general investing public gets the same exposure to your ideas and your opinions, we'll say. So how do they find that level? How do they get comfortable with approaching a mortgage broker, a creative mortgage broker? I don't think it's any different than with realtors or lawyers. They don't all have the same level of experience and knowledge for creative strategies.
A lot of word of mouth and referrals is how I get my business. So you do something good for one, they'll tell 10 people. So start looking for.
I think you just ask, like, when we used to be able to meet face to face, people got to know each other by going up to those people and talking to them, right? That's really how you network. And I think this is no different. Just reach out. We're all busy, of course, but that's how you start the networking. And, if the questions, if they're not something you can answer at that particular time, you're going to refer to somebody who can definitely help them. So I think it's more of a problem for the people who are afraid to ask or afraid to speak or afraid to talk out. My whole thing is, if you want something, you just go for it. And if you have a question that you want an answer to and you think somebody is going to be able to answer it, you ask that person the question. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, sorry, I don't have time to answer this question. But, that's probably less than likely. I mean, we're not commuting anymore for the most part. More and more we have time on our hands to answer questions rather than, driving a car back and forth. So just reach out.
I would say if I was an investor and I'm looking to get the information that you're seeing here, is like Neil said, is do the interview process. And if you ask these questions and you say, okay, Mr. Mortgage Broker, do you help, real estate investors? Oh yeah, I do. And then, probably my second question is, well, do you do creative financing? And not lead the interview, ask them, well, what creative, strategy have you used? And just, zip it. A lot of people, they'll interview me and they'll say, oh, AFS and blah, blah, blah. And they have no idea that I know what that is, because I can just chime in and say, yeah. And, the whole thing. So it's all about, tell me about the last creative real estate deal you did, and explain it to me, and how did that go, and what were some of the learnings you got, and just by asking the open-ended questions about, your broker, you'll know right away if they know what they're talking about. And then plus two, I always tell my clients, I said, when you're interviewing people, say, how many of these creative deals did you do last month? Because if you say, yeah, I did one last year, you might want to just move on, or, that person needs a little bit of brush up on it. So, just ask the open-ended questions and, about some, but say creative real estate. Don't say AFS and rent to owns and all these other ones, because they'll just agree with you and nod their head, and you'll doesn't mean that they'll be able to help.
I got a question here from a mysterious Facebook user, and they said they're working on an RTO deal, motivated seller. The seller is open to VTB. I haven't done a VTB before. Any tips on how to do this deal? I have a money partner for JV. Which banks are open to VTB, and do I understand VTB is limited to 10% of sale price?
VTB means the title changes hands, so number one. So if you're doing rent to own,
yeah, most of the regular banks are just turning down VTBs, right away. Boom, they see any kind of secondary financing, and a lot of the mortgage instructions, they say no financing on top of ours is ever allowed into the future or at purchase time. So, I think that the days of VTBs are still available, but you really have to stretch out onto the creative side of things, especially after the Great Recession of 2009. It even became tighter and tighter and tighter on doing title transfers. And then it's basically like having a seller second mortgage is what you're talking about, right? So, the banks that allow second mortgages are few and far between. And the ones that do, to reference that 10% down, I believe what they're talking about is, the bank at least wants a minimum of 10% of your own money. So if the regular bank's giving you 80, and that these banks are requiring 10% of your own money, then that's where the other 10% piece comes in. And I have heard they're still getting done, but through on exception basis. So if you have like $2 million in stocks and bonds, and you can get the regular bank excited about that, they'll make exceptions on a case-by-case scenario. But for the general rule, I haven't seen too many banks that are allowing vendor takebacks. Even guys, you can add to this too, but even on the B side, now that, OSFI and the whole government restrictions, I can't even get a vendor takeback done on my B side. And that used to be my go-to, is saying, okay, hey, we'll go to the B side, and then we'll put the vendor takeback, and then we'll put the motivated purchaser in there with 10% down. And even those got shut down. I had a case where a seller of the house, one of my long-term investors, wanted to sell that deal to the tenant buyer, and all they had is 10% down. So I thought, great, we'll go get a 80% B mortgage because it's owner occupied, and then we'll put the vendor take back. And I was getting turned down left, right, and center from all the B mortgages. So definitely a challenge. I think maybe, you might even have to go to a small credit union, or have the exception made by, a regular bank with a very exceptional borrower. But definitely a tricky situation for whoever posted that question.
Yeah, I don't even know how you would do a VTB under RTO, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure what the returns would look like on that and who's going to own title. That's kind of an interesting question for sure. I'm out of the country at the moment. We're in Costa Rica, and we're looking at villas to purchase down here for rentals. And VTBs here, for example, just to give you the alternative, they will take 50% down payment, 50% financing for 4 to 5 years, and then you will obviously have to buy it out in cash. So I do believe these type of deals can still happen back in Canada. That's my belief. I know people who are doing these type of deals where they're negotiating with the seller directly, and the seller is holding, whatever percentage of the mortgage, and then basically earning interest each month. But from this perspective with an RTO, I'm not really 100% sure. I'd have to see more of the numbers for me to understand the situation a little bit. But the big part of rent down is you want to have control, right? And if you've got a VTB in there and somebody else is holding a piece of the title, you're not going to have 100% of the control of that property.
On the rent to own, the seller is holding the mortgage on it, right? So on a rent to own basis, I'm not sure what they're trying to drive at here in this rent to own deal. If they're going to buy the property themselves or mortgage on it or what?
Typically with any rent to own we have an investor who buys the property and then we rent to own it to the tenant buyer. So the investor holds 100% title, 100% control. In this situation, It sounds like the seller is open to selling it to somebody else and holding the title for them, which to me, I mean, I don't even know what that would look like on paper, to be honest with you. I'm not even sure how the agreements would go on that. That would be quite an interesting, interesting deal to take to a lawyer for sure. If I'm reading it correctly, it sounds like the seller is willing to take a percentage of VTB, somebody else is going to take a percentage of the mortgage, and then there's a cash partner who's going to be putting down the cash. A little bit too many players for my liking, but again, without seeing the situation and how the numbers are playing out, this is a tough question to answer.
I'm wondering how much of a VTB do you actually want on this deal? Like, if you have a money partner and you're planning on getting a mortgage anyways, I mean, how much, like, do you want the seller to carry 50,000, 100,000, and at what interest rate? I mean, what are you really gaining from this? You're saving a few bucks on down payment funds that you don't have to come up with. You don't.
I don't know, Wayne. I think I beg to differ with you on that, because you think about it. If the investor is buying the house for 20% down and the seller is carrying back 10, you can buy twice as many deals, right? So I think that's what's in it for the investors. For that same 20%, you can do twice as many deals, right? So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm curious what interest rates the seller is going to want to carry that, though, and then the mathematics of it. Are you paying that seller 4 or 5% when you could be getting 3.5% or less? How much extra are you paying a seller just for the luxury of them carrying a certain amount if you're planning on going to get a mortgage anyways? But yeah, we definitely need some more information. Obviously, we're all looking at it at different angles. I did have another question, actually, a few questions here. Barbara has a bit of a doozy. Looking for expertise. 4 acres, $540,000, clear title, no mortgage, with 2 owners, corporations. Okay, that's enough already. Medium density zoning, previous 20. Okay. What's the best way to present a low money down offer with request for seller financing? She wants interest only payments and profits paid to them after subdivision when lots sell. Save our funds for developing the lots. Advice. Anyone want to take a stab at this? Sorry for the guys that you guys are kind of hidden here. How about I just put you up here, so that way we'll go down below for a minute.
Okay. So, I mean, this sounds like negotiation question more than anything. Is you've got a seller that owns this property. Having 2 corporations really doesn't make too much difference, especially if you're negotiating seller financing. If you're going to ask the seller to finance you to minimize your cash injection until the land development comes or the subdivision zoning changes comes in, then it really doesn't matter if it's 2 corporations or 2 individuals or what have you. So I think my negotiations would be the same as saying, hey, what would be the least you could possibly accept to show I'm serious, and have you finance the rest for X amount of time. I guess you'd really have to answer all the seller's questions to have them bite on that, is saying how long is this going to take, and what's going to happen if you don't deliver on what you say you can deliver. So once you get inside the seller's head and can answer that and assure them that everything's going to be fine, I can't see any reason why they wouldn't finance you on this deal, especially if they really have been sitting on this land and not doing much with it. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. I think the question is, how would we approach it? I think that's how I would do is, I wouldn't go in with a set number. I'd really want to find out where they're at and, what they were willing to do. And of course, put myself in their shoes saying, what if this deal goes south? How am I protected? And if you can answer those ahead of time, I think you really do yourself, a lot of service there to, get that deal together and put together. But yeah, whether they do a mortgage or let you take title, we'd have to find out, because in order for you to apply for permits and subdivision applications and zoning changes, I believe you either have to have the owner's consent or you have to be the owner. So that would be something else, Barbara, I'd want to check, especially as you're doing your financing, to marry that ability to go to the town site and do those changes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you'd have to have the title, I think, in your name. So the first thing a rule of negotiating is he who speaks first loses. So, or she who speaks first loses. So like Dan said, you figure out what works for you, and then you start asking what they'd accept. And they may offer something better than you were even proposing. You don't know until you ask, right? Or ask what they're interested in getting. And if they've been sitting on this for a couple of years and paying taxes and not getting any income, they might be pretty anxious to get rid of their property. So
it's if you don't mind me asking, why are you selling?
Yeah.
And they should be on title anyways, because this is probably a VTB type scenario. It wouldn't be an agreement for sale. It'd be a VTB because it's clear title. I mean, that makes the most sense. Get yourself on title, then they can apply for all the applicable permits. But when you're talking about development or bare land, I think that most sellers kind of expect that they're going to have to be a little creative, because you don't really have to finance those type of deals. It takes a while, and then they might be able to move it a lot quicker if they're open to terms that favor the buyer. So yeah, for sure. I mean, just
if they're in the land development business and something like that, they're more familiar with VTBs and creative stuff versus some homeowner who doesn't know what VTB even stands for. So
exactly.
I think it's important too for investors. I'm always shocked at how many investors are not 100% familiar that in the commercial, I would consider this to be a commercial deal, much larger than a residential deal. But I've been doing this for 20 years and coming up with people that don't really understand that when you're buying a commercial property, that is normal. You need to be asking. You always negotiate a vendor take back. Now the one update to that is in a hot market, when the sellers got buyers lined up, they don't have to carry financing as much anymore. So in a normal regular market, it's very, very normal. Actually, if you don't ask the seller to carry financing, they think something's a bit unusual. And you can check with long-term commercial realtors, and they'll tell you a very similar thing, that asking for seller financing or creative financing on commercial deals is very standard. So what you're looking to do is not out of the normal, I would suggest. But yeah, I guess the exception to that rule is a hot market. You can ask for the seller financing, but if they have a lineup of buyers, they're not going to help you.
Once you ask them how much they want for their property too, you'll find out if it's a really good deal. Then there's maybe different than if they want a little bit more for the property. You gotta figure out what the best strategy is for you too. So
Tammy asked this earlier, and I wanted to answer it. Will we be discussing the lending and financial opportunity structures in depth at the RTO course on Saturday? Absolutely. And if you have questions, that aren't answered here, definitely bring them to the course. I mean, that's going to be where we're going to go much, much deeper and focus.
And we're going to have these guys there.
Yes.
Wonderful.
On top of that, I had a few questions that kind of came in before the live, and I wanted to touch on those because we've got some really great experts here today, and it was on the financing for the investor and for the tenant buyer in an RTO deal. So the question was, what do you need to know about financing for when you are buying an investment property for a tenant buyer? So do you have to disclose those types of things to the broker or to the lender? Like, do they take into account when they're doing debt servicing, to take into account your option credits, those kind of questions. And then second to that, what is the financing rules and things people need to know about for their tenant buyer? You know, at the end of it, things, how do you know that they're properly positioned to be able to qualify at the end of the mortgage? So 2 questions.
So I'll take first stab. From the investor side, I don't suggest letting the lender know it's a rent to own. The reality with a rent to own is that it's only a rent to own when they exercise the option to buy the property. Outside of that, you're buying a property, they're leasing the property. So there are lenders that would like to see a signed lease before they will approve the financing. So we accommodate that, absolutely. I do know in situations where an investor has mentioned it's a rent to own, it has caused some problems. In fact, we just recently did one where it was disclosed that this was a rent to own. We have a special way that we do the deposit, and we'll touch on that on Saturday in a much deeper way, but it's about protecting the tenant buyer and knowing where their money is going and who's holding their money, et cetera, et cetera. But the banks wanted to see their history, the tenant buyer's history, because they were putting money down as a deposit. And I've never, in 11 and a half years of doing this, I've never had that question raised where they wanted to see 90 days of financials for the tenant buyer, even though the tenant buyer had nothing to do with the title. So I usually would suggest this is just a lease until they actually declare they're going to buy it. Otherwise, you know, that option to purchase agreement is usually never, ever entered into any discussion with the banks. I don't know of too many banks that care about the deposit.
Okay. Were they considering them to have a beneficial interest? Is that why it came up?
No, I just think that it was miscommunicated. I think that there was some discussion between the buyer and the bank about this person was putting money down. And I think maybe it was not documented properly, and it kind of got confusing for everyone. Again, 11 and a half years, 450 plus deals, first time ever. And I was just like, wow, how did we get here? You know, they are not even on title. Why do you need to see 90 days of their financing? Yes, Donna.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting Wayne's question, but I have a question. Do you 3, as creative mortgage brokers and understanding rent to own, do you find the mortgage and do you communicate with the bank, the lenders, on behalf of the tenant buyer?
Well, there's 2 parts to it. Number one, you're getting a mortgage for the investor to buy the property to make it a rental. And secondly, you hopefully are getting a mortgage for the tenant buyer at the end of the term so they can put their 5 or 10% down to get an insured mortgage. So that's the way it works with most of the rent owns that I deal with investors. And the first thing we do is, you know, check out that tenant buyer to make sure they're going to qualify in 2 or 3 or 4 years. And
of course,
you know, do they have the 3 C's? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the credit? Do they have the cash? And cash you can save and credit you can fix, but capacity from your job and your income, you're not going to say, well, I'm going to get a better job in 2 years and I'll be able to afford it. So that, to me, that's the overarching thing you got to watch out for. And the other danger is sometimes people get qualified as tenant buyers and by the skin of their teeth, and they'll be able to qualify and make the mortgage payments in 3 years, but that extra $500 or $600 or $700 option payment is going to friggin' sink the ship here pretty quick if they can't afford that as well. So,
yeah, great point,
Yeah.
Shaune. I think due diligence is key when you're trying to help a tenant buyer exit. If you've set them up properly at the beginning, they should have no problem exiting at the end. One of the things that we do is we work with them on their credit. So we align them with a mortgage broker who understands exactly where they need to go, and they work to help them get there. The credits are all going to help them build up the right deposit or down payment that they're going to need at the end. Their credit gets improved, so the 2 of the 3 C's are satisfied there. And the third one is, if you've done your due diligence at the beginning, then capacity shouldn't be an issue. Yeah, they could lose their job, but chances are they can find another job, similar income, right? Like, not very many people lose their job and then take a job for $50,000 less just to take a job. Some do, but as long as you have done your due diligence at the beginning, capacity shouldn't be an issue at the end.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is the word, like Neil said, the word rent to own is just in the mortgage approval, space. That's like, taboo, just a bad word. You say that word and bang, your file's, going out the window as fast as it came in. But, like Shaune says, we're really setting this up as a rental property as from the investment side. But having, said that, and I've disclosed to the banks too, I said, well, my buyer, or, if the question came up, and they do have an option. And I believe, Donna, isn't Barry still teaching, like, you have the lease, or is that just an Alberta thing, where you have the lease and then the option to purchase is a separate contract? So you can, you keep it separate, right? So that you can do the evictions, and the tenant buyer is not treated like an owner, and then you have to go through a rigmarole foreclosure process. So just keeping those separate and telling the banks, then, my client's buying a regular rental, and if it comes up, yes, that they have an option, and so what if they have an option? That doesn't mean that they're buying it, they're not buying it. So, that's how I position it. It's not lying to them, but at the same time, it's not throwing out that big bad taboo rent to own word that's got, regular bankers scared, that kind of thing. So just, having the relationships and knowing what to say and how to say it can save you, you walk into the corner branch and say rent to own, screaming that word. Don't be surprised if you get shown the front door, that kind of thing. And then just like the guys were talking about, and all the tenant buyers, that is such a good, the good side of what we do. I think of, one of my tenant buyers that was new to Canada, and he just needed to establish some credit. It's not the case that he had bad credit or anything like that, couldn't pay his bills. He didn't know how credit worked in Canada. He just needed somebody to show him where to start and how it works, and don't go too crazy with it, and just be like a coach. I call myself a kind of a mortgage qualifying coach, right? Rather than a credit counselor, that kind of thing. And just, it's such a great, I love rental. And it's just, I've seen so many people with the big smiley face at the end of the 2 to 3 year term. Neil, I'm sure 450 smiling faces. So that's the good part about what we do.
Awesome. Wayne, do we have any more questions, or?
We have a couple here. A little off the RTO. Here's one right here. What's the max LTV available on CMHC financing, and is it based on purchase price or appraised value?
95%.
Yeah, I guess you have to clarify, is that buying a house for yourself to live in, right? That's the only residential financing typically you see these days, is financing on yourself. Perhaps maybe they're talking about commercial, and that's 85% of lending value, but that's a whole other ball of wax there. But based on purchase price or appraised value, yeah. So if CMHC is financing it, they always go on the lower of the two, remember. So they're buying, they're going to give you 85 or, yeah, they're going to go finance you based on the appraised value or what you paid, whatever is lower. So that's, loan to value, like Shaune said, 95% if you're living in it. And again, 85% of whatever they determine the lending value is of your apartment building.
It's often less than what you paid for it. So.
Oh, 100% in most markets. I have seen rare occasions where it is the same, but that's really rare.
Yeah. So.
We've got one last question. I think that'll just perfect timing. We're at 6 o'clock. How long do you need to hold a mortgage before you can refinance? We kind of touched on this earlier. If you have a property with a commercial mortgage, are you able to refinance to a conventional residential mortgage if you renovate the property from a commercial type property to a residential?
Wow. There's a lot of mixing and matching going on there. Number one, I don't know how you would get a commercial mortgage on a residential property. Most of those guys will just, bail and turn and burn on that one. So maybe if we're talking about a private mortgage on there, perhaps, but I'd love to know more about, how we're getting the commercial mortgage on. Maybe you're severing it and taking a big property into a small residential. Maybe that's what they're referencing here. Let's just read. If you renovate a property with a commercial, from a commercial type to a residential. Oh yeah, so you really have to do the sever if you're taking a larger building that's commercial and chopping up into, let's say, a triplex or a fourplex on the residential. Then yeah, you have to really work with your lawyer to get it to the stage where you can put 4 residential mortgages on there, and usually they want to see some condo, rules put in there, depending on how many units you've got there. But what's the question? How long do you need to hold? As long as you have provisions built in, and you could, work it out with your lender. But typically on commercial mortgages, you're locked down tighter than the residential one. So you really have to be careful. If you knew you were going to be changing it over in 6 months, let's say, you would definitely want to ask your commercial lender for an open product, and a lot of them have that, hoping for the business down the road. But yeah, that's a tricky question. But how long do you hold it? As long as you don't lock yourself in, you can break it anytime. But definitely a good question, and you have to break in a commercial mortgage is 10 times more expensive than ever breaking a residential one. So be very, very careful.
Awesome. Well, I think that just covers everything. What an awesome session we had today. Yeah, thanks everyone. Donna, do you have any closing thoughts?
Thanks very much. So sure looking forward to Saturday. We're going to dive into rent to own on a level we haven't even done yet, and we've done it. That wasn't going to sound right, so I won't say that. So please register. Wayne has put the information there. Use coupon code RTO Creative. And yeah, thanks guys. So get back to cervezas and whatever else is going on.
Nice. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, guys.
What's going on Thursday, Donna?
Thursday is all access for the focus team and the Olivers. We're going to talk about the RTO focus workshop and answer other questions that come up.
Nice. All right.
Some of you on Thursday as well.
See you there, and see everybody else there too. Bye, guys.
Bye, all.